Take it away.
All right, coming down in 3, 2, 1. Hi there, I'm Judy Croon, Canada's Keynote Humorist, and welcome to another episode of Laugh Long and Prosper. Today's guest is my good friend, Elaine Lindsay. Elaine has been my social media guru for years. She's the brains behind my website, and she even gave me the name Canada's Keynote Humorist. But beyond that, she's a dear friend and a fellow believer in the power of humor to heal. We both know that laughter isn't just about jokes, it's about finding light when things get heavy. Elaine Lindsay is the Dark Pollyanna, a speaker, a podcaster. She's the host of Suicide Zen Forgiveness, a podcast that creates a safe space for those touched by suicide. And she's also a trusted voice for those navigating grief and loss. Elaine is an author. She is a survivor who embodies contradiction. 50% suicidal ideation and 50% relentless hope. She speaks fluent contradiction, laughs in grief, and finds beauty in dumpster fires. Through radical honesty and messy truth, Elaine helps others release the silence, the stigma, and the shame around suicide and mental health. Her brand? Finely tuned chaos served with a whole lot of compassion. Elaine, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. That's it was interesting to hear it
Well,
from someone else. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I know, but man, you've got so many credits and you're doing so much good work right off the top, folks, in terms of street cred. I'm going to let Elaine tell you about her most recent street cred with a group, the honesttalk.ca. Elaine, take it away because I want folks to check this out as well.
Okay, I'm a little gobsmacked with this.
Mm,
I wrote a little piece on LinkedIn, and it was seen by Catherine Clark, who is one of the founders of Honest Talk. And she asked me if I could turn that into an article. So this issue of Honest Talk, my thought, it's under thoughts. My thought is from suicidal ideation to radical optimism, the birth of the Dark Pollyanna.
mm.
I've only really adopted that name in the past year, so I wanted to, with that short little piece that I originally put out, I wanted to explain to people really what it meant. And it truly is about that dichotomy of suicidal ideation and extreme optimism. And living with those two parts, it's kind of like a bizarre dance.
Mm-hmm.
One tends to lead more often than the other. And I'm really happy to say now that one is Pollyanna.
Well, Dark Pollyanna, congratulations. As I said, you are doing such amazing work for others, for folks in the community around the world. In fact, your podcast, Suicide Zen Forgiveness, has been around now for a number of years. And this all sort of kicked off with your own story. I mean, this is sort of how we started talking because you wanted to turn your experience into something positive. You wanted to turn it into a presentation that others could take from. So, just so for people who don't know, I got to be honest, you have such a powerful story about nearly dying in surgery. Can you take us back to that moment and tell us what happened?
Absolutely. And yeah, I have to say, thanks to you, I literally went to a workshop, partly to hear you because I had been asked to speak at an event about my life, and I'd never done that before. That was actually 2013 in
Mhm.
June. Here we are. And you and I started talking and just kicked off what to me is an incredibly wonderful friendship.
Mhm.
And you've taught me a great deal about the humor that I didn't realize I had always been using. It's been probably a better crutch than pharmaceuticals or anything else,
Mhm.
is having that ability to laugh at myself. Uh, the reason that's not always funny, I'll take you back to 1983. I had decided I was going to go for what amounted to an experimental surgery. It's a long, long story, all of the pieces there, but what it amounted to was I had only one choice for a surgeon. The surgeon, unbeknownst to me, was being investigated because he'd already killed two people.
Mm.
And when he did the first surgery, he, well, we'll never know what exactly happened because there are multiple OR reports. But what it amounted to was he caused a gastric leak. He, in fact, cut my vagus nerve
Mm.
and caused this leak that was kind of dripping into my abdomen. And I actually went home. I lasted 17 hours after a week. I had a tube in my side to feed through that was supposed to be there for 3 weeks. And I was to have nothing by mouth for those 3 weeks. I fought tooth and nail for this surgery. I went against everyone in my family. So I was bound and determined to do what I needed to do.
Mm.
This doctor tried to gaslight me when I ended up back in emergency. And the next morning, I had to go for surgery again. This is barely 7 days after the first surgery. Again, it sounds like a little chorus to a song, but we'll never know what actually happened in that surgery because there are multiple OR reports. What we do know is I came out of the surgery actually worse off than when I went in. The gastric leak had now gone farther through my abdomen and I was going septic. I developed peritonitis and then my lung collapsed and they had to put in a chest tube. And 6 days later, on my daughter's birthday, they had to do another surgery. They gave me less than 12 hours to live if I didn't do the surgery. They took me into the OR, and here's the chorus again.
Hmm.
We don't know what happened because
Mm.
things went off. What I do know from information from the residents and later from court, I stopped breathing one time and my heart stopped. I'm not sure
Mm.
what order that went in, but whatever happened first, the stopping of my heart, gave the doctor the impetus to take everything he'd done apart. He was trying to cover his tracks by undoing everything. They got me breathing again at one point. They got my heart started again at another. And by then, he had made such a horrific mess, they couldn't close me.
Mm.
Here, he got, I don't know, a weird idea. He called in a thoracic surgeon. This is somebody who deals with like the throat, the neck, what have you. And he had him slit my throat and divert my esophagus out my neck.
Oh.
Yeah, you heard that right. This is not normal. Usually, when I first talk to a medical person and have to recite this, they look at me like I'm completely crazy. That ended up being like that for over 7 months. Luckily for me, the nurses in the hospital figured out that they could teach me how to use a colostomy bag. They called a stoma therapist, that's someone who teaches people about colostomies and what have you, using the colostomy bag. And this is hard to imagine, but it was on my neck. They taught me how to apply it on my neck around the hole
Oh.
so that the saliva, which this will get gross, but saliva's like battery acid.
Yeah.
It was eating all of my skin on my chest wall. And
Had they ever
thankfully,
done this before with a colostomy bag? Do you know?
no, no, I was told this has never happened before.
Jeez.
And
And can we
for
mention,
the
sorry, one last question. Can we mention the hospital or at least the city where this all happened? Because I'm sure there's people out there going, I'm never going to see that doctor. I mean, you don't have to give us his name, but if you want to give us his initials, I mean, go ahead.
his name is Freeman. The hospital is the Ottawa General.
Wow.
And I can name it because
Okay.
I went to court.
Good. Okay.
We lost. That's
Mm,
for a whole other show, that is.
yeah. Wow. Is he still
However,
practicing?
to the best of my knowledge, they have just stopped him.
Just like recently, you mean?
Relatively recently.
Wow.
What's interesting is back in the early 90s, he was stopped, thank God, but not because of all he'd messed up in surgery. The nurses in ICU call him Dr. Nick because he nicks everything he touches.
Jeez.
But what happened in the early 90s, his vanity and narcissism got him arrested because he punched a guy who he assumed had done something wrong on the road. He chased this guy, stopped him, punched him in his car, and dropped his, I think it was like a knife. He had this little knife that had his initials on it.
Oh my God. It's like
Sorry,
when
I'm
you hear
chuckling because you
it's like
can't
when you hear
you
serial
can't make
killer.
it up.
Right. It's like when you hear serial killers don't get caught for being a serial killer. They get caught because they had a burnt out light bulb on the back of their car, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And more to the point, okay, the universe works in funny ways. We had moved in 2004, and I had gone to Canadian Tire to try and get a little set of shelves for the kitchen or a cabinet or whatever it was. And I couldn't lift it, couldn't lift much. But this little lady came out of nowhere. So, oh, I'll get it, blah, blah, blah. And
Mhm.
the next thing I know, we're talking, and here she's a nurse at the General. And she said, I noticed your neck. I have a big scar on my neck
Mhm.
because it's a problem. Our bodies try to heal themselves. So by the time they finally closed my neck, it caused way more problems. I couldn't swallow. They had to keep doing surgery to expand my throat and open it so that I could swallow again. Well, she asked about it and then she asked more. And she's one of the first people I actually said anything to. And
Mm.
she said, oh my God, you're going to love this. And she proceeds to tell me that he was marched out of his office in his clinic at the Ottawa Hospital in handcuffs, which
Oh,
was, thank you, universe.
yes.
I
Thank
needed
you.
that. Yeah. Yeah. He was so very full of himself. He The surgery I had, he only had a cohort of 37 people. Remember, he killed 2. After a year of going back, being unable to eat, and still having a tube in my side that I fed through, he said there was nothing wrong. It was in my head.
Mm.
It was also in my left side, but that didn't matter to him. I had that tube for 13 months, and it
Oh
was
my
finally the head of emergency who was
goodness.
the one that had to reinstall and cut my bowel every time this stupid thing fell out. And he said, "You know what? I just can't do this anymore. We're going to put you on Onshore. It's a protein drink."
Sure.
He said, better you have that than you have this. And he was right.
So I interrupted your story just because I wanted to get a bit of background. You were saying that the nurses said to you, but so basically they'd never tried this before
Oh
because this
God,
is
no.
all on the fly. So you get the colostomy bag. attached to your neck because your esophagus is outside of your body now.
Yeah.
So then just catch us up to the part of the story
Well,
that you just said just now.
yeah, hang on. The esophagus was draining out my neck. It wasn't actually
Okay,
out
got
my
it,
neck.
got it.
But the interesting or important thing about the colostomy bag, the nurse that thought of this was brilliant. And she thought of it because they started sneaking me popsicles. It
Hmm.
had been, I think by this time, it had been about 6 weeks. My lips were cracked and dry. Yes,
Mm,
I was getting sustenance through the tube in my side, but
mhm.
you get so thirsty. Your mind just goes
Of
crazy.
course.
And one night after people were leaving, the visitors were getting ready to leave, the nurse came in and she said, "Okay, as soon as everyone leaves, we have a surprise for you." Like, oh, by this point, I was getting pretty depressed. I
I
was
bet.
not comfortable where I was. I had tubes coming out of me all over the place. I had little things that looked like hand grenades. They're
Mm,
called Jackson Pratts. I
mhm.
had like 2 on each side that just kind of hung there. I had a great big tube out my right side that was attached to a bag. We don't know what that was, but I called him You Go because you go where I go. And he lasted more than 7 months too. He
Mm,
ended up going home with me.
mm.
But the colostomy piece, that first night, 3 nurses came in and they all had handful of like used towels. And I thought, what's going on? And they gave me a popsicle. And then I understood why they used towels. Because anything that went in my mouth came out my neck.
Mm.
Sorry, really gross here. Think of blue and red and orange popsicles all together. Because you give me one popsicle, that's not the end of it. It became the thing. So the minute I would actually kick visitors out, oh, it's 8 o'clock, you gotta go.
Mhm.
And the nurses would bring all the towels and they'd stuff them around my neck. And when we were done, they would put them out in the hallway. I used to think, oh my God, I wonder what the cleaners think in the morning. What on earth is going on in that room? I was in a 4-bed room, so it wasn't just me. But that saved me, I swear, mentally to keep
Mm,
me going and want to keep going because every day they were coming in and doing other things, and residents and young interns, you kind of lose touch with the fact that the patient is a human being. We're not pincushions.
mhm.
We're not just there unfeeling sacks of human meat. We actually feel things. And it really hurts when they have your husband hold you over the lunch table and make a hole in your side to put in a chest tube
Oh.
and telling me, "Oh, stop it. It's only going to be a few seconds. It's not no big deal. You've had all
Mhm,
this before." Yeah, it
mhm.
is a big deal.
Of
Okay,
course.
it's me you're cutting into. I think every every nurse, every doctor, everybody that deals with patients should spend 48 hours in a hospital bed and have all of the tests that patients get so that you can have some empathy for the people lying in the bed. That's just a little bugaboo of mine.
Of
Back to the
course.
colostomy bag. Back then, they were clear plastic. And they had, the clips that you put on chip bags and what have you, that
Mhm.
they're not the ones with the ends on them, but they go together sideways. It
Yeah.
looks like a pincher thing.
Right.
That's what went on the end of it to close it so that whatever came through would stay in the bag. Sorry to get gross, but that's kind of how it happens. And when we got that on and I could have popsicles, then it was just a matter of draining the bag and we could clean it from the bottom. But this clear plastic bag hung from my neck down my chest. When I got out and was able to go home close to Christmas time, my parents wanted to, oh, this is so awful. They wanted to puree some of Christmas dinner
Oh.
so I could have it and then we could take it out of the, oh my God, I can't even say it. It's like, Mom, I am not sitting at the table making everybody else sick. That's just wrong. But I will say the worst thing for me about that damn colostomy bag, it is such a bitch to accessorize. Nobody goes with clear plastic. I did always keep my sense of humor. There were days where it wasn't right at the forefront, but it was a long, long slog to get out of that hospital. And it only was for about a month and a half before I had to go back and they would start looking at putting my neck back together. That happened in March of the following year. And it was absolutely terrifying. On New Year's Eve, my husband had to drive me to the doctor's office. And I knew this doctor only from memory because he had been my aunt's doctor years and years ago, which meant he was pretty old. He was also an alcoholic.
Mm.
And I only knew that because when I went into his office for him to check out the hole and decide what he was going to do, his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't get the colostomy bag off my neck.
Oh.
Now, these colostomy bags, they lasted only 2 to 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So there was still a lot of damage like around my neck, but nowhere near that of all the saliva on my chest. So it was a good thing. But something that only lasts 2 or 3 days, you don't need a lot of strength to take it off. That'll tell you just sort of where he was.
Right.
Leaving that office, I was in shock, thinking, you know, I'm not going to live much longer.
Mm.
They're going to kill me. And there's nothing I can do about it. So I decided that, you know what, we're just going to do what we can. And New Year's Eve night, after I got home, I decided that I was going to go with everybody else because it's New Year's Eve and you're supposed to have a drink on New Year's Eve. But I couldn't have anything by mouth. So I decided that I would put it in my J tube in my side. And I couldn't use champagne because it's fizzy, and that wouldn't work. I actually used an ounce of tequila.
Oh, wow. If you're going to go for it.
Yeah, figured what the hell? Let's do this. It was interesting. There's no hangover, and you don't get the yucky taste, so that was good. Unfortunately, the doctor found out.
Uh-oh.
And this doctor, who had butchered me now 3 times, who was, as I said, already being investigated, he had the audacity to yell at me for taking a drink on New Year's Eve through my J tube. And he actually brought it up 12 years later in court.
Oh. Oh, no.
Which I just at the time thought was pretty funny. Like this is what you're fixated on.
Yeah, no
But
kidding.
he also told the court that he used, quote unquote, poetic license in writing his reports in the OR. That should chill you to the bone. That is a horror story in the making.
Right. This is, I don't know, you talk about still having your sense of humor through this. I mean, after such a traumatic experience, how you found still had your sense of humor, but your strength to come back from this physically, emotionally, spiritually. You often talk about the dark Pollyanna. Suicide Zen Forgiveness has helped so many other people. Can you explain what it means to you to have your experiences now be used to help others? I mean, do you look back on that and go, I just didn't see this coming? And, I'm sorry that it happened, but in a way, if I can just help one person come back from the brink,
Yeah.
then that makes a difference.
Well, we have to plug in one other piece of the story here. When I was 16 years old, my dear friend Andrea took her life on New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve plays a big part in my life for some weird reason, over and over. And it was back in 1971, 72. It was the worst thing that had ever happened. And I did not deal with it well. I did not deal with it, period. It is what it amounted to. The next 4 years, I spent haunting that cemetery, trying to get answers, which is absolutely impossible. I was so horrifically broken, and no one understood, including me, because I didn't understand suicidal ideation. I didn't even know there was a name for it. I knew nothing about it until just a few years ago. But what I did know, since I was a very little kid, if I burnt my toast or dropped a plate or whatever, one of the options on the table for me right then and there was, well, I could just die. I could just leave. And I don't know where it came from. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know everybody didn't think that way. But what I did know in those times in the 60s, if there was somebody in the family that wasn't quite right, you didn't say anything. If you met somebody that had a problem, you didn't say anything. Everything was about not saying anything. You didn't tell tales about your family or anything else, outside of the sacrosanct place that was home. It's just how it was. And at 12 years of age, I had started volunteering at what's known as Rideau Regional Hospital School. It's no longer viable, but what it was a giant asylum. It was what we would now probably call a mental health facility. Back then, it was massive. The main hallway was almost an eighth of a mile long. Like, this place was massive. And volunteering there, even volunteering, I saw things that no young person should. But when I was 15, here in Canada, you couldn't work till you were 16. But at 15, they applied from Rideau Regional to get me a special dispensation to work there for the summer. And I worked with 18 and 19-year-olds that we all stayed in 2 dormitories. It was one for girls and one for guys, or I guess one for women and me, the guys. And we stayed on campus. We worked all day, and I went out with them at night to places I should not have been. And I did not look appropriate aged to be in the bars, or at the time, all the bars in this Smith Falls area had strippers, and it was not anything I should have been exposed to. But I dove right in there because I wanted to be one of the people that I was working with. I felt,
Of course.
it was cool to be with these older people, and they were paying me. I got $400 for the whole summer. I worked there from the end of June until the end of August. And I worked basically from sunup to sundown.
Oh,
I
gee.
taught swimming to the adult training unit. And believe you, it had to be so bizarre for some of the people there to see this barely 5 foot tall little nothing working with some of the men in my unit were 6'2", 6'5", and they didn't always want to do what you wanted them to do. So I learned ways to cajole people into doing things, and using humor actually works. And I guess I've always done that. But 4 days after I got there to work that summer, I was out heading to the yard on the unit where I worked, and I saw this kid that I used to take the bus with. His name was Michelle. He was same age as me, and he went to a different school, but we had to take buses. And after you go to school with somebody that long on the bus, you know something about them. And I came up and went, "Hey, I didn't know they gave somebody else a special. Like, how long, how did they get you here?" He
Mm-hmm.
said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, they had to get all those papers signed, that dispensation thing, so I could work here." Like, who signed yours? This boy lived in a home. Back then, they had homes for wayward boys.
Mm-hmm.
He had run away from home multiple times. His mother had remarried, and the stepfather was, to me, dangerous. He beat Michelle, he beat the mother and the other kids.
Terrible.
And Michelle didn't put up with it. He would keep leaving. So they put him in this home. And he said, "What are you talking about? I live here now." And I I had no concept of what to do with that. I could barely figure out, like, oh my God, this makes no sense. But what I knew from volunteering for the 3 years before that was he wasn't going to stay Michelle, because I didn't have the words for it back then.
Mm.
When you put people in a group, we don't rise to the highest level of that group. Everybody lowers to the level where everyone is comfortable.
Right.
And by the end of that summer, every weekend when I would go home, I would say to my mom how unhappy I was that Michelle was there. I was happy with what I was doing for the most part. I I think we did a lot of good being there that summer. I can't erase the memory of seeing the people coming out after having electroshock therapy.
Mm.
These are things I never should have seen, because all they did was add to the bank of "don't say anything to anyone
Exactly.
about anything." And everything in me became so secretive. So the next year, when Andrea died, all that came together in this perfect storm. And I now know I basically reverted to 12 years old. There
Hmm.
was no more maturity. There was no going forward. There was none of that. It was just la 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 la, let's be 12.
Right.
I went through most of my life not comprehending money, not getting why, people went to a job 9 to 5. They did all these things kind of like little robots, well,
Mm-hmm.
in my estimation. Never voiced any of that. But when Andrea died, somewhere in my brain, it was, oh my God, since you were 5, this is what you mean. Every time you say you're going to die, this is what you meant. And it messed me up so bad. I
Mm.
went into drink and drugs and what have you. And finishing the story, for another day. But 4 years after Andrea died, I was stopped on the highway. I couldn't get off the highway because of the snowbanks in front of Andrea's grave, where I was crushed between three cars. I lost part of my leg. This is what pushed into all the surgeries and all the darkness for me that really brought the ideation to the forefront. Pollyanna didn't have much of a choice in those years. But I've come to look at it now as the best worst gift anyone could ever give you. Andrea gave me the knowledge of what it meant to be left behind. And so every time I came close to the edge and went over it a few times, I would always remember and hear her in my head constantly. Are you really going to do that? You hated it when I did it. What about your family? Are you really that two-faced? Blah, 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 blah. That was always there. And I can comfortably say today, in November this year, I will be 70 years old. Holy shit. I can't even believe that. You know, until a couple of years ago, I always said, and you can attest to this, oh, yeah, hi, I'm Elaine. I'm X number of years old, but mentally I'm 12. That was always my line. And I never understood what it was. And then 2 years ago, David Amerland, a dear friend who is one of the smartest human beings on the planet, we did a show with Suicide Zen, and he was explaining the neuropsychology and all kinds of things. And he asked a question, and we got talking after, and he said, oh my God, Elaine, you lived in such chaos. No wonder you had these problems. And we kind of unpacked it. And now I can say I'm no longer 12. I have somewhat matured, maybe 15. But I've brought all that knowledge and experience with me. And I now have the tools that I can use to help other people. And that's why I do the podcast. Because if we can save one person, just one, then my life is worth it. What I've set out to do is valuable. I would like to save everybody. And to that end, I will finish with, we need to learn to listen. Okay? Listen to our kids, listen to our elders, listen to the strangers on the street. But what we need to do, and when I say listen, I mean that. I mean shut up and listen. No one's asking you to fix them. No one's asking for your opinion. Everyone wants to be seen and heard. Just give people a few minutes. And if you need, I've said it before to young people, I will duct tape my mouth so that you know I can only listen. And there you have it. That's from chaos. There's the compassion. Listening.
Incredible.
Not necessarily the duct tape. Hurt's coming off.
Elaine, thank you so much for sharing this incredible story. It's hard to believe, but I know you're telling the truth because I've heard the story and I'm still in shock every time I hear it. Your journey is definitely a powerful reminder that even in our darkest hours, there's always room for humor, and that laughter can be a lifeline when we need it most. You've inspired so many people. I know you have through your work, and I'm grateful to have you not just as a collaborator, but as a friend. I know our listeners will take away a sense of hope and the reminder that even when life feels overwhelming, there's still light to be found. sometimes in the most unexpected places. So please keep shining that dark Pollyanna light. And again, for people who want to contact Elaine, her podcast, Suicide Zen Forgiveness, you can go to thedarkpollyanna.com for more information if you want to reach out to Elaine. Again, her podcast is Suicide Zen Forgiveness. But if you want to actually reach out to Elaine, thedarkpollyanna.com. Elaine, thank you so much for everything that you do.
Well, thank you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to reach out again and talk about duct tape.
Keep shining that dark Pollyanna light. Until next time, folks, on behalf of Elaine and myself, laugh long and prosper.